Hi folks, we are blessed to have Carol Linden with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about typology with her, and this is going to be a good hangout. So over to Carol, who has a few questions about Enneagram.
Okay. Did you want me to introduce myself briefly?
Yes.
Yes. My FE is like this big. I'm sorry, Carol. Yes.
My name is Carol Linden. I'm a type practitioner in the United States. I'm based in the southern part of the United States. So if you think you hear an accent in America, this is what we call a southern accent. I've been studying type for about 30 years, but I've been a type practitioner for about 15. I use it in corporate America. I'm a speaker. I'm an author. I'm the editor of the Bulletin of Psychological Type for the Association of Psychological Type, and I'd be very happy to accept proposals for articles. So let me just put that little plug in for APTI. So I've been a speaker at conferences for several years. And I just published my first book for job seekers a few years ago, and that comes out of my volunteer work, helping every Monday morning I facilitate job seeker groups. So I love type. I use it in my personal life. If I use it in my professional life, I'd just rather do type than just about anything else when I get out of bed in the morning. So I'm just happy to be here and happy to have met Ben. Jonathan, if the topic is asking questions about Enneagram, I'm so happy to do that. I had two very bad Enneagram experiences, and then I had a wonderful one. And it was a day-long workshop at a type conference in the United States. Oh gosh, I can see her face. This is embarrassing. Her name will come to me. But she's a therapist from the United States who's been using Enneagram and type for like 25 years. And oh, she was so fabulous. She really knew what she was talking about, and it was such a positive experience, and it was clear she knew what she was doing with it, and I was able to identify myself as I have ENFP preferences, very clear, very, very off the chart, classic ENFP. And I think I'm a 2, a helper type. And yes, all the holes that helpers fall in, I've probably fallen in all of them. So now she did say something interesting I want to ask you about. She said that there's some schools of thought in Enneagram that believe you start at one place on the diagram and that you move to another place as you get your healing work done. And she said that the Enneagram types were defense mechanisms, and she actually didn't see people move to other ones when they got healthy. She saw people get healthy and quit being more defensive. So she said she probably made some other Enneagram people mad because she had just never observed people doing that move. That's the only thing I think she would say different from maybe other Enneagram folks, but she really valued how, as a therapist, using type and Enneagram, she felt like she was able to help people so much more than if she just used one model or the other.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not that, I don't think anyone actually says that you become a different type or anything like that. I'm saying more that it's growth and disintegration. You'll take on the traits of a different type when you're either very healthy or very stressed, but your core type does not change.
Right.
So this is integration, disintegration. So if you're type 2, then your lines of connection are to type 4 and type 8. So
I'll just do one slight button. Now, there's been a little bit of change in the theory about 15 years ago. Originally, when it started, it was a very strict case of like the 2. I think it's disintegrates to 8 and integrates to 4. Now the theory is, well, you can do both. You can have a 2 that can go to some of the positive sides of 8, you know, where they learn to become a little bit more assertive, but in a good way rather than just a negative way. So maybe on the whole, the disintegration might be, say 2 would disintegrate to 8 and integrate to 4. It can be the other way around. So I'll just let people know that, because that's a mistake that usually gets propagated around.
Jonathan, actually, two things. One, I remembered her name. It's Pat Wyman, and she's published a book, and she teaches in Europe and the U.S. I found her to be a wonderfully knowledgeable resource. But guys, I'm not as knowledgeable about Enneagram as type. I mean, I'm barely knowledgeable. So would you mind speaking to me for a minute about type 4 and type 8? Because I'm not as familiar
Okay,
as you guys are.
Yeah. So
Perfect.
what I was saying was, you could think of these two as kind of like if you think of type 2 as your defense mechanisms or your strategy, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. But this would be like new ways of thinking for you, or different ways of thinking. So type 4 is, well, type 2 is compliant and positive. Compliant means they have a sense of responsibility. And specifically, type 2 is compliant to harmony and interpersonal relationships and getting on with people and so on. Positive means they try and see the bright side of life. They'll try and look for the silver lining.
Oh, Jonathan, that would be me. That would so be me.
Yeah. So with regards to that, it can also be a defense mechanism in terms of look at the silver lining when they should be acknowledging the darker stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So neither type 4 or type 8 or anything like that. So you can sort of see that as either you're stressed, you start acting like those two, or you take on the traits of those two. So if you're type 4, they are withdrawn and reactive or authentic in an emotional sense. Type 4s are more in touch with their more authentic emotions rather than just their positive ones, or mainly the positive ones. They can come off as perhaps a bit darker and more often more artistic. Sort of the stereotype of the moody artist would be a very good thing. Slightly more depressive, perhaps, overtly.
Okay.
But with type 2, that would be more learning to be in touch with your less positive emotions and seeing the value in them and being more real, and also being perhaps less extroverted and learning the value of being more introverted, and not so, because type 2s aren't necessarily extroverts, but they are more drawn to people, and they can do that as a way of avoiding their own emotions and their own pains rather than exploring them and acknowledging them. So that's what 4 is about, and that's where 2 can learn from 4. Type 8 is more like your stereotypical ESTP or ENTJ sort of person, where, well, those two are not always 8s, but they're often 8s. More aggressive, more assertive, more willing to go after what they want, identify it, more in touch with their anger, multi-charge. So again, it's about being willing to acknowledge anger and express it, and being willing to go after what you want rather than putting them off because you're trying to get on with other people or trying to help other people. Under stress, the type 2 and the type 4 and the type 8 can come out though. So a really stressed or unhealthy type 2 can become angry in spite of not wanting to be angry, and they become aggressive in spite of not wanting to be more militant. And they can also be more like type 4 in terms of being very moody and depressive and melodramatic and all these things. So that's the general idea here. That's what the 2 connecting to 8 and 4 means.
Thank you. That is actually very helpful. And yes, I can see that being a type 2, it would take a lot to push me into that type 8 behavior. But if you if you violate one of my values enough, as ENFP, I'm all about values. If you violate one of my values, like trample on somebody else and behave in an inappropriate way with someone else, that could make me get assertive and stand up for somebody. So thank you. That was a great explanation, Jonathan. Thanks.
Right.
And this also matches up with ENFP can have a strong unconscious role function, extroverted sensor, and sometimes extroverted sensing is connected with, especially in socionics, with power sensing and some characteristics of the 8. And so usually it manifests itself as, don't try to put that ENFP in a box.
Oh yeah, don't try to do that. You're right, Ben.
And as you said, when it's a combination of because they are the advocate of social change. I mean, they can go into that advocate role, and so they have that little bit of, it's where the role function is like, in the case of the ENFP, they don't prefer extroverted sensing. They don't get a kick out of throwing their weight around. But if someone tries to put pressure on them, they will resist it and stuff. And the role function is a function which is something that needs to be constantly worked at and can develop over time. So, for instance, you can have like INFJs that get into art and work and do like lots of SI kind of things, like meditation. And although meditation does have like an NI half to it and an SI half to it, but getting back on track to Enneagram. Back to Jonathan.
Yeah, so you were talking about defense mechanisms there, and that is a bit of an older idea in the Enneagram community, because originally the idea was that your Enneagram type was not something you were born with, it was something you were bred with. It's to do with your early childhood experiences and so on. It's a bit more fruity in that way.
Right.
A more modern take, and a lot of the authors who used to advocate that have changed their minds here. They actually think that it is something you're born with, and a lot of the experiences you remember are just things you fixated on or focused on because of your type already. So you were already a type 2 and so on. So we'll talk about type 8s. Type 8s often report that they had one particular experience that made them realize they have to get tough, they have to get strong, something that the world is a dangerous place and they need to be strong to survive it. But if you look at them before that moment, they were still kind of like that, still quite angry and assertive at times, even if they didn't necessarily think about it. So the idea of defense mechanisms is true, but it's also somewhat limiting and a bit misleading because there's a lot more to it as well. And I think I've even heard one psychologist say that Freud calling them defense mechanisms, Freud talking about defense mechanisms in general is a bit misleading because they're much more natural than that. They're more normal responses, and he was using that language because of the type of person he was and the type of society he lived in. He used a lot of military metaphors and so on. So it's really more like a strategy and drives and motivations and so on. So that's my take on that. It's much broader. The core of Enneagram is to do with your fundamental drives and motivations and worldview and basic assumptions that you don't even necessarily think about them, but you kind of take them for granted. You just kind of assume. It's like when you're born, your first reference point as a human being for the rest of humanity, of what other people like, is yourself. And so you're always going to have things about yourself that you just assume are true for almost everyone. And they can be at times, but they can also be kind of skewed, and this is where you start to see the differences.
Okay.
And yeah.
I was just saying, John, thank you. This is very helpful. I'm really appreciating this, especially you're talking about it being bigger than defense mechanisms. This is terribly helpful to me. If I can ask you this, do you find that there is generally a correlation between someone's psychological type preferences and the Enneagram, or is it more mixed up than that? Like, can you have an ENFP who's naturally something other than a 2? What's your take on that?
Yes, so ENFPs are actually usually 7s, not 2. Uh, but I do agree that there are going to be correlations, and some combinations are just less likely than others. So an ENFP who is a type 5, for example, is very unlikely. Type 5s are the normal type. Type 5s are the stereotypical types for INTJs or INTPs. They're very introverted and withdrawn and cerebral and perhaps a bit cynical and nihilistic, and these kind of things that some ENFPs can be kind of cynical at times, but not quite in the way a 5s stereotypically are.
What I would say about to all the intelligent people out there, I would say the key characteristic of the Enneagram 5 is that they will wall off their emotions, and they will suppress their emotions, and have lots of little boundaries in their lives, and really actively suppress their emotions in the way that an INTJ and an INTP can. So you can have very intelligent people who might think they're a 5. No, it's just that they're very intellectual. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're a 5.
Yeah, so type 5 is characterized by being withdrawn and competent, which means they, as Ben said, they try and take their emotions out of the equation and look at a problem as objectively as possible. So ENFPs are usually type 7. Some are type 6, some are type 2, of course. Catherine Favre, who we're going to have today, but she can't make it, sadly. She types as an 8, which is also quite different. So there is variation. ENFPs can be quite varied, but stereotypically they're 7s.
Okay. Would you mind saying a few words about? Does it make sense to you that I feel totally like a helper personality, even though I'm an ENFP? Okay. So would you mind taking a few minutes to describe the 7 to me, so I'll see what more people like me are like?
Carol, one thing you can do is, if you feel like it, you can click on my box, and you'll see some of those things. Now.
I can see those. This is wonderful. I'm appreciating what you're putting up there, Ben.
Yeah.
And actually, I was going to ask you both if you wouldn't mind sending afterwards in the chat, maybe, or whenever you want to.
Yeah.
If you want to recommend a favorite book you think it'd be great for me to read on the Enneagram, I would absolutely love that. I would love to be more knowledgeable about Enneagram.
No problem. Okay, so type 7s. Type 7s they're also positive, so they're like type 2s. They look at the silver lining and they try and be upbeat. But they're also assertive and aggressive. That means they seek pleasure and they try and avoid pain. They have this underlying anxiety, and it's more about they're anxious about their inner world and negative emotions and so on, and they try and seek fun or excitement or interesting things or ideas or people and so on in order to distract themselves from that. Their adventures a bit hedonistic. They're for ENFPs that can manifest as things like reading fun books or going on adventures or attending conventions of fantasy or sci-fi or anything like that. These can, yeah.
Jonathan, I've never had the courage to do that, but I wish I were the kind of person who could put on a costume and go to that, because I kind of watch that from afar. Maybe there's more 7 in me than I know, Jonathan.
Yeah, I've been to a couple recently. Like, I never used to go, but I went recently, and so I think quite a few were ENFPs there. So the main difference is 7s are a bit more overtly selfish than type 2s. Type 2s can be selfish, especially when they're less healthy, but 7s are more, they see less of a problem with being selfish, and even when they are helping people, they'll like the idea of it being for selfish reasons, kind of like they're doing it because they want to do it, not because they're obligated or anything. But that's the sort of person they are. So Robin Williams, for example, is considered a certain type of type 7 ENFP, and many comedians are type 7 ENFPs, and there's all kinds entertainers very often.
You know, Jonathan, you're right. I had totally pegged him as an ENFP. I thought of him as an ENFP on steroids, and who had ADD, because he admitted he had ADD, and he also did drugs when he was younger. So I just thought he was this out of control ENFP is how he came across to me.
Yeah,
fantastic, and I would just say a wonderful program for actually parents to show to their children is Mork and Mindy, because it's like because it's like how an alien integrates into society and learns social rules.
Oh, that's a great idea.
I think you're showing your age there a bit, Ben, but okay.
Hey, I watched that on a program that was dedicated to that decade. How dare you, Jonathan?
Actually, Jonathan, guys, it would be interesting to let's show a Mork and Mindy episode or two to some millennials and see how it strikes them, because I have no idea how that would strike them. But at the time, Robin Williams was like, nothing had ever hit the scene like him before, and it was just like totally fresh. So I would love to know how, excuse me, how millennials would look at Robin Williams.
Oh yeah, because they'd know him. Because he went on to become such a good performance in Good Will Hunting.
Oh, absolutely. He's wonderful in that.
So just because of the stature of the man, what they will notice is, blimey, he was hairy. Although they wouldn't say blimey.
He must have had some Scottish in him.
Right. With ENFP, we've got off track a little bit, but actually not too much off track. But yeah, Mork and Mindy, because that was like such a vehicle for his humor. And right, so there's some things where what was I going to look at? We've done. Carol, did you learn about the instincts when you did your Enneagram?
You know what? Not that I remember, because it was back in 2007 at a conference. I spent a day long at it, and all I remember is that woman knew type and she knew Enneagram. It was a fascinating day. But no, talk to me about that if you'd like to, you or Jonathan.
Okay, so
fine, Jonathan.
The instincts are another aspect of type. They came about later. It's one of those things that was part of the Enneagram theory early on, but it wasn't really developed or caught on until much later. So the basic idea is that all animals have, or most animals have, 3 basic drives. So the social instinct, the sexual instinct, and the self-preservation instinct. Humans have them too, but because we're more complex, they manifest in more complex ways. And everyone has all 3, but they'll have them in a certain order. With your first one will be what you want, what you're almost neurotically focused on, what you're preoccupied with. Your second is the instinct you're most comfortable with, which can mean you're good at it or it's your least worst. And your third is your blind spot or hidden agenda. It's the last one. You may or may not be aware of it, you may or may not like it, but the other 2 generally get priority. You're just by natural preference, by instinct. So self-preservation types generally are focused on things like food, money, clothes, job, perhaps family and stuff, but they're about resources and survival and prosperity. Trying to perhaps, they can always a bit selfish in that regard, but they do like to share they can be generous when they're sharing resources and giving gifts and so on, but it's a bit more material focused and security focused. The social instinct is about belonging. It's about social issues, could be sometimes about politics. Other them in and out. It's not necessarily the same as extroversion or anything. You could be, I mean, I'm a social type, but I'm an introvert and I'm quite a loner. But it's about being very aware of social relations and subtle power structures and so on, and things like that, and your place in the world. And the sexual instinct is the intimate instinct. It's one-to-one. It's the need to connect to someone or something. It's not necessarily about romance, but it can be about intense experiences and having your favorite people in the world and fixating on them. Passion, that kind of thing. Yeah, so these are your three instincts, and they'll show up in certain orders, and they can mesh with your Enneagram type. So you're saying you're a type 2, but there's different types of type 2, even after accounting for ENFP. So you can be a self-preservation 2, you can be a social 2, or you can be a sexual 2. That would be
I think I'm a social 2.
Maybe. Okay. Social 2s are. Well, why do you think that?
Well, I'm very aware of and this can be cultural imposed too. In the South, we have a very old-fashioned level of the United States. We have a very old-fashioned kind of courtesies and manners and politeness and sense in social situations than in the rest of the country. It's kind of a more ancient version of how to be in society, and very, very aware in this part of the country of being appropriate and what's right to do in the social situation, making everyone feel comfortable and making people feel welcome, that sort of thing. Does that sound like a social type?
It can be, yes. Definitely. Well, if you were social last, you would be less concerned with that sort of thing. Let's put it that way. This could also be your weaknesses. So a social last type might be socially inappropriate because they don't necessarily notice these kind of things, or they don't pay much attention to them. They may even find them intrusive at times. They're more focused on their resources or on their relationships as you go. But yeah, that can be that. So social 2 is, well, let's put it this way, it's not just social, because you also have a social self-pres type and a social sexual type. Those are two different stackings. So a social self-pres type tends to be perhaps a bit more of a politician, or maybe a diplomat, or a business type. They're a bit more focused on perhaps activism, or in positions of being a position of power. And the mentality is more, if I can get in a position of status within the group, within a given group, then I'm in a position to help people from a position of power. They can have this sense like they want to help people, but they want to be the one who helps people, and they want to be in charge of be in a position where they can help people from a position of power, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, I may be more social sexual then, because I do tend to have, I do tend to like to have close friendships, not casual friendships. I mean, I know a lot of people, but I really like to spend time with people I can have what I call the real conversation with. I want to have a meaningful conversation, or I don't want to have a conversation at all.
Okay, so yeah.
So there is some intensity about me in relationships.
Okay, so yeah, I think we were talking with Catherine today. She said, yeah, social sexual twos can have lots and lots of friends, and she said that they have friends in every, like a friend in every continent, that sort of thing, or a friend in every city. Like they'll always have people they know wherever they go, and they'll be able to make friends easily. That sort of thing. Does that make sense?
It does, but oh yes, I can. People say that I can talk to anybody. I can go in any situation, and just conversations happen. But what I really like is to have one-on-one time with friends that I can just not, what's the word? Not hold back what's important to me personally, and really have deeply personal, meaningful conversations. Not trivial, lightweight, socially polite conversations, but talk about real things. I don't like trivial social situations. I like having a meaningful
Well, then you may be
one-on-one.
the sexual type instead, sexual social,
Okay.
which is as in you're aware of the social, but they're not as if they're not as important as the intimate one-to-one stuff, then that would indicate that you're the sexual type instead. But,
Okay, well, yeah, you could be right, because I do tend to I'm nice to other people and publicly, but I don't want to spend time just casually. I want to spend time with people I can have meaningful conversations with.
Okay, so what do you think about self-preservation stuff, like someone who's really occupied with their job or their career and
I'm a classic catalyst as far as Kiersey stuff goes. I mean, it's really is hard to make somebody like me focus on money, because it's all about what I believe in and the fact that I love type and I know I can help people's lives. So, no, I don't think I'm a very good self-preservation person at all.
That's exact. Okay, you're definitely either sexual social or social sex. So you definitely sound self-preservation last there.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to understand what the other stackings are like, those other instinctual stackings, just think about what your attitude is towards self-pres. That might be their attitude towards the sexual or the social. That's sort of.
Oh, I can imagine that. I mean, I'm trying to be very careful about it, and I have a good intuitive sense about the space between me and other people, and I get it that there are some people who would feel intimidated by the level of conversation I would like to have. So I'm very careful about being light with them, but I seek out and spend time with people I can have the deep conversation with.
Okay, so that thing about being aware of the space between people, that is a sexual instinct thing, like the desire to bridge it.
It's also slightly off topic, but within the realm of typology, that is how sociologist defines FI. And actually, I'll give him his credit, because Jack Aaron, sort of like, I heard this explanation from him about FI, is that they say that FI people know exactly how they feel about everyone and everything.
Oh, yeah.
So that way they can sort of judge the distance between someone based on how they feel about this person. And when someone's like, someone fits more the ESTP or ENTP pattern, it's more of there's not the gradations of like how close someone is to them. It's like, it's like black and white in terms of like friend, enemy. And it's not these fine little subtle distinctions. And that feeling of connection, there's a bit of an overlap there with sometimes. I mean, generally, a lot of FI people. Do you think a lot of FPs, Jonathan, will have a tendency to be more sexual than, say, social, and the FE people, a tendency?
Could be, yes.
Maybe it's not huge, but maybe like 70-30 kind of preference.
Perhaps.
I can see that, Ben, since we're not using sexual in the usual meaning of the word sexual here. Right. But yes, I think the FE is more aware John Beebe taught me. I used to go to John Beebe conferences back when he held them and traveled more. And he talked about extroverted feeling is hyper aware of what of an impact something will have on people. So they're actually less expressive because they're being more careful, whereas introverted feeling is more in touch with the intensity of it. and we might be more expressive out of the passion for something we believe in. We have a sense, he said, of naturally understanding the power in a situation. That's part of evaluating things and sensing value. We can like be in a situation and we can just almost like feel who has the power in that group. And he saw that as connected to introverted feeling, being aware of value.
That's interesting. That in I think socionics would say that well, it would say that naturally ESFP and ISFP would naturally have a feeling for power because that's how they define extroverted sensing. And I think that for NFPs, they would naturally have a feeling for it in case of something that they don't like and something to watch out for, because it's like a red flag for them. It's something that there's like, and it's for me as well as an INTP. It's like that they have like they've got a little button you can push there, like any kind of aggression that they can sense. And so they can sense people, like if they're throwing their weight around and something, because NFPs don't like extroverted sensing in terms of like volitional power. People being a little bit too pushy.
Oh yeah, you're right, Ben. I'm very sensitive to that. Absolutely, because I feel like I have to put up walls. That makes sense, guys. It's like it's too much power coming in, and I have to do this to keep them from rolling over me.
Yeah.
Well, I think Ben was saying that INTPs don't like it either. Like they're
Yeah. That's just a thing from a little rule there for people. Like they can get to the break function, the weakest function, by you flip the vertness. I love that word, of the tertiary function to get to the break function. So, for example, INTP has tertiary SI. Flip the vertness, so you got S stays the same, the I switches, and you get SE break. And so INFP is also tertiary SI, so SE break. So and apparently that's called trickster function in the Beaver model.
That's right, I get that.
Yeah, so now we're talking about socionics.
Oh, I'm sorry, folks. But back on track.
Yeah. So yeah, I think these descriptions that Ben's got up are a bit stereotypical. Like they describe certain types of...
I have loads of graphics if you would like me to put a different one up.
Ben has great Ben, I have very much appreciated your graphics. I really have. I'm a visual person, and they have helped me. I do appreciate your when you put those out in the chat.
Yeah.
Well, we must thank Nick Helbig, who has taken these from. I believe these have come from Beatrice Chestnut's book.
Well, they can be from Naranjo, and they've just come from the same.
Yes, ultimately from Naranjo being the ultimate source. And what I would say is that, Cal, is that with Enneagram, you have to be aware that there's different schools of it, and because it's such a subjective system. Where, so for example, Naranjo, when he was describing the 8, I believe he was also describing the ESTP. So when you look at his Enneagram 8 description, you're probably thinking, whoa, only an ESTP can be this.
Yeah.
Whereas Catherine Favre has more got to the essential characteristics of it, where it's sort of like it can be open to more types than just ESTPs. Now, Naranjo, I think he grew up in Chile.
Yes, he's in Chile.
Catherine told the tale that a true 8 will always stamp on a lizard when he sees one. So it's just that hardcore South American upbringing. And so these non-type factors, I always remind people of the non-type factors. So yeah, if we have a look at the 8, for example, we can see bits that do sound a lot like... Oh, and also with the type 7. I'm type 7, and all of this stuff, well, I regard... Jonathan thinks I'm a type 5. Or maybe I'm just a disintegrated 5, really disintegrated 5. but a lot of this relates to me. But I would say, looking at this, Carol, now, not a lot. That this is more towards the intuitive kind of 7, like NPs. A lot of NPs would fit this, and mentally links things together, but maybe not so much the SPs. And there's other descriptions of 7.
I just want to say, type 7s are usually and stereotypically they're ENFP, ESTP, ENTP, and ENFP. So the EP types, those are the classic 7 things. So if you think of what those 4 types have in common, stereotypically, you've got a rough idea of what the 7 is like.
Yeah. But I'm just sort of like saying that, so people have to look around various sources. So Beatrice Chestnut's book, The Complete Enneagram, 27 Paths to Greater Self-Knowledge. Jonathan likes that book. He's endorsed that book. And
I'm sorry, Ben, that went by way too fast. Please say that again. I'll write that down.
Right, The Complete, what is it called? The Complete Enneagram. Now, that's a little bit cheeky, though, calling it The Complete Enneagram. I would never go that far. So she gets a point knocked off for being the complete. Ooh, never say that. The Complete Enneagram, 27 Paths to Greater Self-Knowledge.
Okay, thanks. Who's the author of that?
Beatrice Chestnut.
Beatrice Chestnut. And this is pretty much, this will tell you what Naranjo thinks.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you.
Because she's collected together all the information from Naranjo and some of her own experience as well. Jonathan, no. And then there's also these 2 books. And Jonathan, there's... so this is like the big one for 96, Personality Types. And this has the... at the back, this will have the core dynamics in. And this goes into lots and lots of depth. And what's actually good is...
Who is that, Ben? Personality type.
Yeah, that's Don Riso with Russ Hudson.
Okay.
So that's the late Don Richard Riso. And Catherine knew him quite well. And she knows Russ quite well. And then they wrote this other book, Understanding the Enneagram, which has like lots of extra stuff in for this. And what's good is that these books are quite different from each other. So, for example, this will concentrate on the levels, like the 9 levels and things, and the wings, whereas this concentrates on defense mechanisms. Is that right, Jonathan? What do you say the benefits of both books are for people?
Yeah, well, firstly, the orange one, the personality types, that's very, very good, but it is a little bit out of date in some ways, and it focuses more on specific subtypes without realizing it. But the strength of it is the amount of depth it goes into, and the fact that it talks about the levels of health within your type, so differences between a healthy 2, an average 2, and an unhealthy 2, and so on. Okay. We're really talking about 30 pages per type.
Wow. Which one would you like to recommend to me, Jonathan?
Well, both.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's both. I mean, I think it's probably best to do. Because, so for example, one of the reasons why is, and to like get your own opinion, Cal, because there is a large amount of subjectivity in Enneagram. So for example, the Enneagram 7 in this one will have more stuff about sensory kind of Enneagram type 7s. So and this one leans more towards the ENFP kind of 7.
Interesting.
So you know how it's going to be because it is so much more about. I mean, as with Kersey being a little bit more scientific because it's like words and tools, but ultimately, it's got motivation in there with the essential motivator pattern kind of thing. But with Enneagram, those 2 main schools, different kind of books, different schools of it, and also it stops people from falling into a filter of like typology's type is NLP's filter. Right? They would say you're just looking at you're just looking at a person through the lens of a type and ignoring everything that doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Whereas if you learn more systems, then it sort of like gets you the person to stand back a little bit and to realize, you know, that they're useful. The map is not the territory.
That's exactly right. The map is not the territory.
Yeah.
But it's useful.
Yeah.
You know, exactly, Jonathan. It's useful, but it's not the territory, and we have to remember both of those things. Well, guys, I have got to do something very mundane, like get a tire put on a car, because I flattened a tire last night and had to have a spare put on. So I have to drive to another town now and get a Michelin radial put on a car so I can quit driving 40 miles an hour with my flashers on, because these stupid little spare tires I put on cars now aren't real. But Jonathan, thank you so much. I have learned from every minute of this, and I really appreciate your generosity in being willing to teach a type person so much about Enneagram.
It's okay. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Ben, thank you for inviting me. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
I'm glad you did. And I hope people got something out of this hangout. It's all about the networking. That's what it's about, this channel. Right then. So it's goodbye from me.
Bye.